Welcome, a really warm welcome for everybody. Welcome. Whoops, here we go. Have to get all my gizmos straight. So we'll start with a guided meditation. Just a light guidance, not a lot. To finish arriving to our seat here. That is to sit, either literally or figuratively, to sit and to know that you're sitting. What does that mean, to know that you're sitting while you're sitting? Bring in the attention, bring in the awareness to the experience of the moment. In this moment, we're sitting. Part of noticing that we're sitting is noticing that we're connected, we're grounded, connected to the zafu, we're sitting on the cushion, maybe a zabuton, a mat, maybe a chair or a bench, whatever it might be. It can be helpful to feel the contact of the body with what's supporting the body. And then to rest the awareness on the sensations of breathing. Feeling the movement of the chest or abdomen, or feeling the air going in and out of the nose. And noticing in a way that's relaxed and yet purposeful. Finding the balance between the amount of effort we're applying and when the mind wanders, as it likely will, we just very simply, gently begin again, without making a problem out of it, without building stories around it. We just begin again with the sensations of breathing. Sometimes when we come to meditate, we find that the energy is low and we feel kind of drowsy or drifty or not really present. One thing we can do is put a little bit of attention on the posture, sitting up just a little bit straighter. And letting that little extra effort with the body help energize the mind. Something else we can do, if you find yourself with low energy, is to bring a sense of curiosity to the experience. Where does low energy show up in the body? Maybe it's a heaviness in the shoulders. Maybe it's a slouching posture. How do the thoughts feel if there's some drowsiness or tiredness? Are the thoughts kind of wispy and not clear, dreamy maybe? So just having a sense of curiosity, kind of investigating, wow, what does it feel like to not have a lot of energy? Does that also mean there's low enthusiasm? But just to bring the spirit of inquiry can help raise the energy a little bit. If our energy is flagging, something else we might try is just to reflect on what inspires us about this practice. The potential for freedom, opportunity to end suffering for ourselves and others. The Buddha, maybe we have a heartfelt connection to the Buddha. Sometimes it can be helpful to bring these to mind. Sometimes when we meditate, the energy's not available for us. Might be a number of reasons why. But we can use the body to bring in a little more energy or bring some investigation or curiosity. Or bring to mind something that's inspiring, that why we're practicing. So that our practice, those times when we're on the cushion, our practice can be fruitful or meaningful or useful, or not just sitting and whiling the time away. So that our practice can support us and be a benefit for our life. And so that we might have energy and be able to support and be a benefit for others. So in this way, may our practice be for the benefit of all beings everywhere. Good evening, welcome, welcome, wherever you might be and whenever it might be, a warm welcome. So today I'd like to continue on this series of the Paramis. First, so maybe I'll say just a word about the Paramis. Sometimes we translate them as perfections. These are qualities that can be a support for our life and for our practice. That's a list of 10. The first one is generosity. Second is ethical behavior, and then renunciation, and then wisdom. And now tonight I'm going to be talking about the fifth one, energy. And energy is a translation of the word virya. Virya gets translated in all kinds of different ways, sometimes perseverance, strength, effort, courage, vigor. But for the most part, I'll be using this word, energy. And Dharma teachers kind of interpret this fifth parami, sometimes as along the lines of right effort, and sometimes more about energy. And it's something that I appreciate so much about the Dharma, that there are so many depths, and sometimes like if you pull one little thread, you discover like, oh, this thread is connected to so many other things. And maybe what's interesting or inspiring today won't be what's interesting and inspiring, for you or for me next year, next week, tomorrow. So I really appreciate kind of the richness of this. So I like it when there's this word virya that gets translated or interpreted in a real breadth. Because I feel like sometimes maybe one interpretation will be really helpful and supportive. And maybe the others don't feel quite relevant until they do, maybe sometime later. So one way that we might understand this word virya, gets translated as energy, is the willingness to stay with what is. That is, to not bounce off of those things that are uncomfortable, suffering. For us to learn about suffering takes some virya, to really understand it, to really find our way with suffering without running away or turning away, but in some ways to engage with suffering in a way that brings freedom and awakening. So there's the teachings of the Paramis are not from the earliest layer of the texts. That is, the Buddha he doesn't himself teach about the Paramis, but instead it was some time later, when this is kind of what the tradition holds, that there was the question of why did the Buddha become the Buddha? What was so exemplary about this individual that became a Buddha? And one answer that came up was because he had perfected the Paramis, these 10 qualities. But in that kind of that literature describing the Paramis, this is how the Parami of energy is this exaltation. I'm not sure what the word is. Kind of a divine. No, it's not divine, but an utterance. May I be filled with inexhaustible energy, vigor, and fortitude in cultivating the path to enlightenment and in working for the benefit of others. So that's kind of how energy, the parami of energy, is described. May I be filled with inexhaustible energy, vigor, and fortitude in cultivating the path to enlightenment and in working for the benefit of others. For me personally, I feel a little bit overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, inexhaustible energy, vigor, and fortitude. It feels like a little bit, either I want to be kind of dismissive, like, oh, that's just hyperbole. That's just from the language of thousands of years ago. Or I feel like, wow, who can do that? You know, somebody other than me or somebody other than anybody I know can have inexhaustible energy, vigor, and fortitude. But then I felt like, so if we, and Bhikkhu Bodhi writes about this a little bit, he's a well-known scholar and translator, he writes about as energy is needed because our own natural tendency is to either flow with the stream of desire or to just drift along with whatever is the tendency of the mind. So flowing and drifting, in some ways kind of being pushed around. But it takes energy to not be drifting, to not be flowing, to either be going against the stream or even to just stop moving. So then when I considered this, then it feels like it makes a little more sense that it takes this inexhaustible energy, vigor, and fortitude is more about not just be drifting and flowing all the time. I know that there certainly have been times in my life when I was just drifting, feeling like kind of like going the path of least resistance. And I found myself and not happy with my life. It wasn't rewarding in the way that I was thinking or expecting it to be. It wasn't until that I really started to look at my life and to make some changes, which was not easy. It certainly took effort to kind of go a different direction or to even look at things more clearly, more candidly. So this idea of energy so that we're not just flowing and drifting. But it takes energy, where sometimes we just don't have this energy. So where does it come from? We're human beings. We have a limited amount of energy. So what might we do to support our having energy? And the classical teachings in the tradition is samvega. This is a Pali word, samvega. I like the way it sounds, samvega. And this is a word that describes what Gautama, the person who was going to become the Buddha, but before he became the Buddha, this is something that he experienced. The tradition holds that after he had seen the heavenly messengers, the old age, sickness, death, and a monastic, then he felt moved, he felt compelled to go on this quest. So samvega is what he had, this sense of urgency, this sense of this, yes, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going this direction. And there's a sense of energy that's associated with that. And so it's this, comes along with a sense of resolve, a sense of dedication, and might be a real support and a fuel for us as we kind of go through the vicissitudes of practice. In the teachings of the Buddha, we don't hear about him having doubt, but we hear about some of the tremendous effort and determination that was put forth. And so, samvega. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu, I appreciate very much his way of expressing this. And he says that it's a difficult word to translate, that there isn't exactly an English equivalent to it, because it has a complex range, according to Thanissaro Bhikkhu. And he says there's 3 different aspects to this idea of samvega. One is the oppressive sense of dismay, terror, and alienation that comes with realizing the futility and meaningless of this life of just going, flowing, or drifting. So this first feeling of like, oh, what have I been doing with my life? This isn't going the direction I wanted it to. This just doesn't make sense. This feeling of dismay, terror, and alienation. These are powerful words. So this recognition that just drifting is not what we want to do. And then the second aspect of samvega is this chastening sense of our own complicity, complacency, and foolishness. And having let ourselves live this way. This sense of, for me, I had a little bit of anger too. This anger of, I thought that if I kind of drifted in this direction, everything was going to turn out fine. And it wasn't turning out fine. So, and also this sense of our complacency and foolishness, like, oh, why didn't I know better? So these 3 things of this sense of dismay, chastening sense of our complicity, and this sense of urgency. Sorry, that was the 3rd one. I didn't say this. The sense of urgency of trying to find a way out. So these 3 things together, the sense of urgency, sense of complicity, and this dismay, really can be the fuel for practice. And sometimes we only experience this after a grave difficulty, after some tragedy in our lives. That's when we have this real sense of urgency to practice, as we're trying to find a solution and trying to make sense out of things, perhaps. But we don't have to wait until there's a tragedy in our lives. For this samvega, there can be this recognition of the suffering, and it doesn't have to be the most terrible suffering, but there can be a real wish to understand this suffering. What is going on here? How did I get here? So this wish to understand it, which is stronger, more powerful than the wish to avoid it. So we're willing to investigate and get curious about our difficulties. And then that brings us to another way in which we can increase our energy. So first was samvega, this sense of urgency. And second is investigation. To have some curiosity, to have a engagement with whatever it is that we're doing. Whether it's meditation, have a sense of curiosity of the breath or what the mind is doing. Sense of curiosity about what's happening in our life, the way that we're behaving. I think we've all have this experience that we have a sense of energy when we're interested. Like we can sit through like some podcasts, for example, that other people might think like, oh my gosh, this is the most boring thing. But because it interests us, we have like a sense of energy and are really engaged with it. With hobbies, with whatever it might be. And so we can bring that sense of curiosity or investigation to our experience, whatever our experience might be. That is, instead of like slapping a label on our experience, that's boring, this is painful, that's hard, we could really tease apart what are all the different elements. And then this also ties in with the fourth parami, that is the one that precedes energy, is wisdom. In one way we can understand wisdom, or part of wisdom, is that it's discernment or distinguishing. That is seen with some clarity with what really is. When I talked about wisdom, I talked about the owls having big eyes, that is seeing clearly. And part of that is to make the discrimination between this and that, instead of just lumping things together. So one thing that, of course, is important to investigate as part of our practice is this question is, what is helpful and what is unhelpful? What is helpful to find more ease, more freedom? What is on the path to awakening enlightenment? What is not on the path? And maybe I'll say even asking that question is on the path. So to have this question, what is helpful? What is skillful? What is wholesome? What is this? We could even say, what is this? Kind of pointing to the self, maybe as an investigation. Who is doing the investigation? It's more about the openness and the questioning than finding the answers. It's more about being receptive to learning something new, rather than thinking that we have it all figured out. So our mindfulness practice, of course, brings us face to face all the time with difficulties, as well as what leads to suffering and what doesn't lead to suffering, as well as the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. So part of wisdom, part of investigation, and something that can increase our energy, increase our engagement with what's happening, is to have asking these questions. This leads to suffering, but is this uncomfortableness, is this suffering lead to the end of suffering? Looking at my ethical behavior, maybe it's painful. Maybe we realize, oh, there were times in my life when my ethical behavior wasn't so clean. I told lies, or I took things that weren't freely offered, whatever it might be. It might be painful to recognize that in ourselves. But that can be part of the building of our ethical behavior in the present, as well as a part of the diminishing or putting aside those things which might decrease our energy. That is, not being ethical really dissipates and takes away our energy. Because there's always a part of the mind and a part of the heart that is busy with whatever it is that we did wrong. I'm using this word wrong, whichever was unethical, which wasn't helpful. Let's use that language. So samvega and investigation can increase energy so that we might not just be drifting or flowing through our lives. Something else that can increase our energy is joy and happiness. Sometimes we might feel that our practice is drudgery. It has fallen into the category of being one more chore that we have to do. It's something that we just have to squeeze into our day, even though we don't really have time for it, and it starts to feel burdensome. It's just, one more thing we have to do, and maybe it's one more arena in which the inner critic gets to play loudly and have a commentary about the quality of the meditation, or how long we're meditating, or how often we're meditating. So this sense of kind of this drudgery, of course, there isn't going to be a lot of energy there. But can we connect with some of in the beginning, while we were still in the honeymoon phase of practice? That is, it used to be that we perhaps would open up Dharma books, feel inspired by them, go to Dharma talks, feel inspired by them. Can we touch into what is inspiring for us? Maybe it is listening to Dharma talks. Maybe there's a devotional element of your practice. Maybe there's something about doing bowing or prostration that is nourishing and feeds the heart in the way that just hearing a Dharma talk doesn't. Maybe chanting. For a lot of people, chanting is a beautiful practice. Maybe suttas studies. For me, there's something about the suttas that I really love. I was doing some sutta study with some friends recently, and one person said, it's kind of like a puzzle. And, kind of like and what I was thinking, it's interesting how in the newspaper we have Sudoku and we have crossword puzzles, but in some ways the suttas, just kind of a joy of engaging with them and what is being pointed to here? And what is the context here? And how do we understand this? And how is this relevant and applicable to our lives? So for me, I love doing this. It's not for everybody. It doesn't have to be for everybody. But what is it for you that brings energy to the practice? But it might be also that sometimes we have this idea that, but if I'm happy or having fun doing it or it's joyful, then it can't be spiritual. It can't be proper if it feels good. So I would just invite you to investigate that belief. You might recognize I was talking about energy and then investigation, and I'm talking about joy. These are 3 awakening factors. That is, these are 3 energizing factors of awakening. The Buddha identified these qualities It's a whole list of 7. I'm only giving 3 out of the 7 here. But these 3 are the ones that are uplifting and energizing. And my point is that joy is on this list. So joy is energizing and supports our having energy, but it also is a factor of awakening. It's an element, it's a necessary element to the practice. So the encouragement is to find your way with joy and happiness. Of course, in a way that's with kind of keeping with the ethical behavior and wholesome and helpful and skillful. But we need to stay connected with these areas that really nourish and fuel our practice. So if we want to look at energy, it's also helpful to look at, well, what blocks energy, or what dissipates the energy, or what gets in the way? I already talked about unethical behavior, really subtracts, takes away from our energy. Another one is just distractions. How many notifications is it possible for us to have? We just heard one on my phone earlier. My apologies about that. So just that we're often, whether it's our phones or our computers or something, where often our attention is being pulled in so many different ways. Maybe we're trying to multitask and do a few things at once. And so there's a way that kind of like fragments our energy, dissipates our energy to always be multitasking. There's something a little bit more fulfilling and satisfying if we can unitask as best we can, just to bring some focus and some intentionality to our effort, to whatever it is that we're doing, as opposed to just drifting or flowing with it, but to bring some intentions to it. Of course, this is obvious, but something else that can take our energy is just not getting enough sleep. Maybe that goes without saying, but I'll just share for me, just noticing what a difference it makes when one has a good amount of sleep. This should be such a priority, and I'm happy that more and more these days people are talking about the importance of sleep. And so I talked about a little bit earlier about being inspired. This is also, if we're not inspired, if we don't have a sense of a direction that we're going. Sometimes in spiritual circles, they don't like to talk about goals, but maybe if we could talk about the direction we're going. I would say we can talk about goals, we can talk about awakening, or less suffering, less stress. But sometimes we shy away from having goals because we have this feeling like, well, maybe other people can do that, but I can't. Somewhere there's this kind of lack of self-confidence that is prohibiting us from dreaming big or even having an aspiration. And so sometimes not having that can cause there to not really give an occasion for which the energy to coalesce around or the energy to come together. So not having a direction, not having an aspiration, not having a goal, using whatever language feels appropriate for you. But what is the purpose, if we want to use that language, for your practice? And maybe sometimes that feels too heavy-handed. And maybe sometimes it's really helpful to connect with your aspiration. So we can have some curiosity about that, bring some investigation to that. So I've been talking all this time about increasing energy so that we might, with this parami of energy, have this inexhaustible energy, fortitude, and vigor. But of course, we can have too much energy in terms of it spills over into restlessness or doesn't allow if it's out of balance with concentration, then there can be, then the mind can't quite settle if there's too much energy. And pointing to that is this simile of the goldsmith that we find in the suttas. And it goes like this. Suppose a goldsmith would prepare a hot furnace, heat up a receptacle, take some gold using tongs, and put the gold into the receptacle. So, like this, the gold is sitting in a crucible and is getting heated while the crucible is in the furnace. And then from time to time, the goldsmith would blow on it, sprinkle water on it, or just look on as the gold was heating. If the goldsmith were to only blow on it, it's possible that the gold would just burn up. If the goldsmith were to only sprinkle water over it, it's possible the gold would cool down. If the goldsmith were to only just look on, it's possible the gold would not reach the right consistency. But if the goldsmith would from time to time blow on it, from time to time sprinkle water on it, and from time to time just look on, the gold would become purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability. Then, whatever ornament the goldsmith wishes to make from it, whether it's a bracelet, earrings, necklaces, or a garland, that can be achieved. This is significant because the way that the Buddha is describing the gold here, when it has just enough heat by blowing on it, or just enough water by cooling it, he's describing the gold as purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability. The Buddha uses these exact words to describe his mind right before awakening. So he's describing not too much heat, vigor, not too much coolness, not too much standing back, but from time to time. So to have a balance with our energy. Probably many of us are familiar with this, also another story about Sona. I'll just say, who was a lute player, like a stringed instrument, and the Buddha teaching the strings should not be too tight or too loose. Again, pointing to the importance of balance with our energy. So may we use our energy in a way that helps us on the path to enlightenment. And let's see, I'm looking for the definition here of how it's used in the. May I be filled with inexhaustible energy, vigor, and fortitude in cultivating the path to enlightenment and in working for the benefit of others. And working for the benefit of others. Thank you.